When did you take these?
Well, a lot of them were taken before the spring, but I took some of them here in 2011.
Those are beautiful.
See,
I've got some of those.
Yeah.
You gave me some of those.
see, they used to have me take people from overseas and stuff that bought juice out on tours, and I enjoyed them.
I did one of your tours.
Are you ready
And
to?
they used to tell me, says, well, how do you get these pretty pictures? Well, I was joking with them all the time anyhow.
You do
I
that
said, well,
every year,
I'll
don't
go
you?
down to the packing house and
Like
stand
that.
there on the grain belt, and I'll take them out.
About co-ops, and I wanted Dalton to talk a little bit about the co-op from the perspective of the small grower. And your father was probably one of the earlier original members of Golden Gym, and he was a believer in the co-op. Tell us a little bit about the loyalty, the relationship that you had with Golden Gym and so forth.
Well, my grandfather and my father joined Golden Gym right after it started. And prior to the cooperative forming, there wasn't a whole lot of information around for growers as to what their crop was worth or how big the whole crop was in the state of Florida. And so buyers would come by and they'd look at the crop on the tree, offer to buy the whole crop for X many $1,000s or whatever they thought they could get away with. And or they maybe buy it by the box, or if they had somebody that really didn't know what they were doing, they were going to do it less load, pick, and haul, which was a double profit center for that guy. So they didn't know what the value of the crop was, and finally the cooperative movement came along, and growers began to get information. And I think there were two periods where my family, we were small growers. We, Dixie was talking about growers growing their own nursery stock. My grandfather and my dad grew their own nursery stock, and they were also planting bare trees, but we didn't have the machinery. We had shovels. We did have a big old water wagon like that, and that was very useful. But as small growers, I don't believe that my grandfather really got out of debt until World War II, because there was a big demand for agricultural products, not only in the nation but to feed the troops. And prices were good, and they got out of debt. And then the prices went back down again, and then when they joined the co-op, things began to get better, because the co-op would tell them what was going on and what the other growers were doing and what the prices were. Plus, as a pass-through, the grower was going to get paid based on the pool. And so there wasn't anybody selling the crop in New York or Chicago and keeping all the change, or the middleman that got the change. It was the grower became a part of a business, an integrated business. And so because of that type of service in our family, we stayed in Golden Gym the entire time. And sometimes, I think every time you have something like that, you've got people that will take advantage of the system. And sometimes cash market looked a little better than what might be projected in the pools. And if growers could, they would escape and go sell their fruit on the cash market, and then they might come back in again, and there was kind of a revolving door. But our family stayed the course. And I asked my dad one time, I said, why don't you get out there in the cash market? The cash market's better than blah, blah, blah. He said, well, there may be a freeze one day. And during the freeze, the co-op would take care of the growers. And that meant a lot, because, what you were hearing from Dixie and from Jack earlier, is everybody worked together, and nobody could get their fruit harvested first, but everybody kind of got along. Sometimes I remember one time we didn't get our fruit picked at all, but we got participation as if it had been picked, because everybody went to the pool.
My experience was that people that chased that last nickel, by and large, they paid the price. they might find it one year, but they missed that ring lots of times on the short side. I used to tell people, you know, your number one goal is to find a marketing organization that you trust and feel comfortable with, and you know, you just set up a long-term marriage there. Over the long run, you're going to be a whole lot better off. And your dad, though, talked about Jack's dad. Your dad, one time, I was put out something in my newsletter about citrus trees not knowing that price was low and that you ought to be able to, you know, still have Dixie fertilize and spray them and everything. And he saw me and he said, you know, he said, my citrus tree might not know the price is low, but my damn banker sure knows the price is low. And if you haven't got it, you just can't do it, you know. So there's
another thing that Fred says, you can't be a citrus grower unless you have trees in the ground. So you have to keep at it.
Well, I think that, you know, that the co-ops were really a crucial entity and part of the citrus industry, especially in this area. They played an extremely important role, and I always marveled at the interaction, the sharing that took place among. There weren't any secrets within the organizations. You could talk to somebody about what kind of herbicide to use and how things were going, and everybody was open and shared the information. So I think it was great.
What kind of role did the railroads play? Because there were a lot of railroads in this area at one time. I'm just starting to do a little story on that, so I'm just curious if there's anything.
They were really important because we needed some way to get this fruit out. I mean, it wasn't that you could take a mule and wagon and haul it to New York or anything. Now, they used to take them from the packing house there in Umatilla Fruit Company, and a friend of mine used to take the team of mules and go to Astor and put them on a boat. And he'd take one team and drive it and lead another one. So he could haul 66 boxes on the 2 wagons.
Did the railroads come first and then the packing houses next to the railroad lines, or did the lines come to somewhere than the packing houses already were?
Some of the packing houses were already there because they were using them to ship stuff out on boats. They'd take it to Crow's Bluff and load it, or to Astor and load it, and then they'd go down the St. Johns River.
So the railroads would send spurs out to the packing house to be able to pick the fruit.
And the railroads had, you know, there was a lot more traffic on the railroads, and so you had, you know, fruits obviously perishable, but you could get a line up into the population centers in the Northeast right away because they went, and you don't have that frequency for fresh fruit like that anymore. Mainly it's by truck because they're faster and they're refrigerated.
Well, the main reason that the trucks took over was because the railroads went on strike.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they really lost out. We had 13 carloads of watermelons on the track. We never got a penny out of it when they went on strike. And then too, when you had a railroad, you had to go in and go to wherever it was and load it and take it to the warehouse. With trucks, you just went directly to the warehouse and cut that out.
Railroads played a big part of gift fruit shipping in the early days. In fact, there were a lot of small little packing houses located near the railroad tracks, and believe it or not, the train would stop there and they'd load what we used to call express fruit. That's what the term that we used, express fruit. It was gift fruit packed in bushel baskets mostly, or in some form of a wood container, or I'm sure in the earlier days in barrels. But that was one way of getting fruit direct to the consumer. Was gift fruit played a big role in Lake County at one time. That was really the beginning stages of marketing fruit north, I think.
Did the some of the old terminology, we were sitting around talking, Jim Ellis and John and I, and Jim says some term, and I said, what the heck is that? Dough balling, remember? He's talking about dough blind. Anyway, so that started up another conversation in terms of some of the old citrus terminology, and he said, well, they called them boxcars because originally they loaded boxes of fruit onto those crates, onto the train cars. And that's where they got the terminology boxcars. Can you guys think of some other terminology that's, indicative of the industry? Like you said that, what is it, croaker sack? How do you spell that? Is it C-R-O-A-K or what?
Gunny sack.
Well, instead of using croaker sacks to keep that water from sloshing around, my father used to use Spanish moss.
Yeah.
He'd pack the top of that drum with Spanish moss and it would float on top of the water and it wouldn't slosh out. You ever seen that?
Now, we always used a lot of Spanish moss when we were planting trees, and I'd
Mhm.
send the crew out and they'd pull a whole load of it because we were cleaning up land and we had plenty of it, and it was such a good thing to pack your trees in to keep them wet.
It'd keep them moist all day long that way, they wouldn't dry out.
And then we finally had to start going to getting hay, because you had to keep your trees wet.
So what are some of the other terminology that you can think of?
Well, one thing that we talked about croaker sacks, and it for some reason it triggered the thought of early on. Did you ever have any blocks that you had snails in and,
Oh, yeah.
and use those, and you'd put those fertilizer bags or croaker sacks or whatever else and hang them in the crotch of the tree so the snails would go down there and spend the winter in the croaker sacks and the bags and everything. But we had snails that used to be really fairly common, I guess. That
Well, in some areas, there wasn't a whole lot of them. Over there in Leesburg, Ms. Austin's dad, Captain Kramer, he was one that even sold snails.
Yeah.
What did you use the snails for?
They would eat the pest and take the slime and stuff off of your trees.
I had no idea.
It
We
looked
had
like
a-
they'd been fresh oiled when
We had a grove in Yamaha that was in the hammock soil area, and the humidity in that grove was pretty high. And snails were real prevalent, so much so that when you harvested the fruit, the snails would be on the boxes, on the fruit, on the trucks, on everything. When it came into the packing house, they hated it because they would get squashed, in the rollers, and they'd have to shut down once in a while and scrape the snails off. But they ate the rust mite, and they ate spider eggs, they ate almost everything. Talking about putting the croaker set bags in the crotch of the tree in real dry weather where those snails maybe were gonna die. We used to I had a job doing that one summer, actually riding behind a tractor on a trailer with drums of water, and would take that croaker sack and dip it down into the water and hang it back up into the tree where it would have moisture, and the snails would go in there and survive.
they would feed on the things like sooty mold, which would get on the leaves, and when they're done, it's just shiny and clean, everything.
they made a lot of trips across there.
Well, we like to get all the free help we could get, with the snails. And I think, like Dixie said, they weren't really as prevalent as a lot of people made out for them to be. As Glenn mentioned, you had to have the right environment. I'd get a call and someone have a snail grove, and you'd go to look at it, and it's kind of like, yeah, they were here yesterday. I caught a bunch of fish right here yesterday, but they weren't there when I'd get there. So it was kind of hard to maintain them, especially when we started getting pesticides in. They didn't
We would
like pesticides.
try to move them into other groves, and they wouldn't last. They stayed right along, this was over there near Frank Lewis's groves on Lake Harris there in Yamaha.
But we had good luck moving. We'd go out there after a rain and get a big old mayonnaise jar, about gallon jars, and catch them and put them in them, and then go and throw a few of them under the trees, about every fourth or fifth tree. It wasn't long before they were everywhere.
That's great.
But you could raise the cheapest oranges that you ever raised with snails, because back then we didn't have all the pests and diseases and stuff we do today. And if you would put snails or have snails in your grove, you could probably get by with dust and with sulfur twice. And then if you sprayed, you kill your snails out, because copper was just death on them. And I mean, people that was trying to keep fruit clean and not have any mellow nose on it and stuff, they'd spray and kill all the tomatoes.
When we first started firing, we were using lighter knots in the grove, and I remember setting up the wood in between the middles with one short piece of lighter knot and 2 pieces of long lighter knot and 3 pieces of kindling, which somebody made kindling all summer long. We had just a shed full of kindling, all of them exactly that long, all of them exactly that big around, and light that wood up. And when we got the sponge pots, that was really modern to get the sponge pots. And you talk about refueling after the freeze. My dad had a year-round man that worked with him. Some of y'all may remember Thurman Carter.
He worked with me for years.
And Thurman and I would get out there on a tanker full of bunker seed. Had two hoses, one on each side, and Daddy would drive that tractor fast enough where we had to run from one smudge pot to the next, fill it up, 20 gallons each, and get that thing refueled before sundown. And by the time the day was over, we were soaked in it. We were just absolutely soaked in it.
Well, your father was one of the few growers that took his heaters in at the end of the year and put them in a barn.
That's right.
That must have been a fun job.
Well, he invented a trailer that was a heater aid that would had a reverse. It had a gear shift on a chain on the thing that would have forward and reverse on it, and it would unload the smudge pots and load the smudge pots up in the trailer, and then you had to move them out and stack them in.
Now, what would you take the fuel out of them, or would you store them in the barns with the fuel in them?
Those little hoses I was talking about work both ways. We didn't waste anything.
You must fell in love with those hoses.
I sure did. Well, you know, then the pruning part, there was a saw before the chainsaw. You remember that reciprocating saw that was kind of tan? I don't remember the name of it, Viking or something like that, I don't remember. But my dad pruned so much in '57, holding on to that chain, or onto that reciprocating saw, that his fingernails turned black. It was just, you know, the vibration, and he was one of these guys just wasn't gonna let go, because he had work to do and gonna get, you know, the next tree done, buckhorning those trees.
And I tell you, that sure beat doing it with a handsaw.
Yes.
Well, there were some creative things that were done after the freezes. I believe that your dad, I don't know who was a partner, that stump grafted a block out there on Calhoun Road.
Yeah, they stump grafted.
And
He had that road must have flipped over.
and they took a 3/4 inch piece of rebar and drilled it down in the center of that tree, and then stump grafted around the side. And when they came up, they tied them to that rebar, and they just grew right around it and made one trunk.
Yeah, till the next freeze. Then we sold it.
Yeah, there were persimmons out there for a while. I think they're people now.
Well, Mike Graham showed us this picture, and all you see is tires down the middle of that
Mhm.
of that grove. They were all lit up.
I never got into the tire business, thank goodness.
Yeah, the problem with the tires was after you burned them, you had all that metal out there in the grove you had to get rid of. That must have played havoc on a mower or a disc.
Oh, we'd have to send them back to the shop and get it cut out with a torch sometime, or get somebody to come out to cut it. Remember that fellow that had the grove over there on, out from Rock Springs on Kelly Park Road? I can't think of his name now. He had this Studebaker agency over in Orlando. He put tires all in his grove and burned them, and boy, we did have a time. Because see, if they were just regular tires that weren't so bad, but they had that steel in them, that was terrible on equipment.
Steel belted tires were great for
If,
the road, but they were bad in the grove.
I don't know whether you've been over to the Mellow Mushroom on 441 over in the Mount Dora area. There is a mural on the whatever it is, artwork on the top ceiling, and the guy that invested in that restaurant is a LaRoe. And
LaRoe.
he came out of the LaRoe machine shop, and my dad and Clarence LaRoe consulted with each other on building harvesting aids. And some of those contraptions are up there on the wall of that, go up there and look, you'll recognize a couple of them. And they tried their best to come up with a picking machine that was, nothing actually worked. The most successful one that they developed was what Daddy called a picking aid. And it would go around and surround the tree so that a hand harvester could drop the fruit down on some canvas, which was rolled to the middle and be conveyored up. But it was so cumbersome that it was difficult to operate an orange grove.
And we're gonna talk about mechanical harvesting and some of the things that did. I believe that everybody experimented a little bit about it.
Sure.
But
Labor was hard, it is difficult to get
Well,
all of it.
Joel and Jim did a lot more than a little bit. We did a lot on mechanical harvesting.
And I might not have my numbers right and everything else, but back for a number of years, you paid all the harvesters in cash and every day. And how in the world did the logistics work out? Would Tiny Noel just go to the bank and clear out everything they had in the bank and put in the back of his car and head out? I mean,
I don't remember how we did that, but you're right, there was a time when they got paid every day.
I remember, I think it was Libby was the first one around here that insisted that they pay their pickers by check. And they got away with doing it every third day. They pay them by check. And of course, everybody said that's the dumbest thing in the world, it'll never work. But a big outfit like Liddy McNeil and Libby, they just ignored the little citrus grower because in their scheme of things, that's the way they were gonna do it. So I guess we eventually weaned them over. But I remember Bill Alberson or Tiny Knowles telling me that somebody from harvesting would swing by Umatilla Bank every morning and throw $25,000 in cash in the backseat of the car and take off and never think anything about it. And
Well, that was certainly true. Watermelon harvesting, they paid cash every day.
I think in Fort Pierce, I worked down there for a little while, and they paid them when they brought the basket of tomatoes to the trailer, and they paid them in dimes. And so if you're on the trailer, when the picker came up and bought you a basket of tomatoes, you gave them a dime right then. And at the end of the day, they cashed their dimes in, so those dimes got recycled thousands of times, back and forth.
Well, Wilson Parrish used to throw that money into his azalea bushes next to the front door of his house.
I heard that story too. Oh, it's amazing how we could.
But I ran a picking crew one time when my dad had to go on a trip for a couple of weeks, and he advised me, he said, now, pay attention to the men that are harvesting the fruit and keep up with how much they have harvested. And make sure when you're going to be giving them advances that you don't overpay them for, stuff they haven't picked.
That was the way to fire
Yeah, but sometimes at the end of the week, we'd have to do a check, but the check might be for a few dollars less the cash advances.
Now go back to the Wilson Parrish story. What did he do, throwing money at the azalea bush? What was that?
Well, he didn't want to get robbed, and I guess he figured that was the safest place to not have the money in his house. So he just dumped it in the azalea bushes on the way in. Big bag of money back there. Nobody knew about that until later, I guess.
That's pretty funny.
He was a unique character.
Well, he's the one that got the $125 labor
Because he ran the labor camp
and the store.
in the store. What about some of the other characters in town that we talked a little about some of the other folks. I never had a whole lot of dealings with a lot of them, but some of them I did. Like Charlie Calhoun. I guess Charlie's still around.
He's still
And
alive.
some others.
Charlie's younger than I am.
sign of old age, I'm.
Well, the
forgetting
mayor of
something.
Umatilla, Charlie's father, Brunt Calhoun, had a packing house, and they were packing, I think, maybe some marginal fruit up around Christmas to get it up to the markets, because there was a good, people wanted to have an orange or a tangerine to put in a stocking for their children. And they would buy a lot, there was a big demand for fresh fruit before Christmas. And so the story goes that Mr. Calhoun was worried that the inspector was going to shut the packing house down because
But what past the maturity status.
exactly past the maturity. So the story goes that he went by the inspector and said, now, it's Christmas Eve or whatever it is, near Christmas, I've got to go shopping, but I'm gonna tell you right where there's a big switch over there that turns the whole packing house off. And if we go out of grade, I wanna make sure we're in grade, but if we go out of grade, I want you to go over there and just throw the switch. You got my permission just to throw the switch. Now, all these people are gonna have to go home, and they got Christmas coming too, but feel free to throw the switch. Never happened.
Great psychology, great psychology.
One of the stories my dad used to tell about Bill Schreiner Sr. had a packing house there in Mount Dora, right on 441. And during the Christmas rush period, tangerines were a big plus. And Schreiner had tied up many crops of tangerines along with my dad. They had the little packing house, Palm Terrace fruit company. And it had started raining, and it rained for about 2 solid weeks almost. I mean, where they could not harvest any tangerines. And my dad said he went by Schreiner's house one day and it was running wide open and raining. He pulls in there and asks Bill, how in the world we got those tangerines clipped? Now, not pulled, but clipped. He said, well, I'll tell you my real secret. He said, I figured out I was gonna go broke right here in this rain. So I went to all the dime stores and discount stores and bought ponchos and raincoats. Every store I went in, I bought all I could buy. And then I went to the liquor store and bought all the little half pints I could buy. And I got my crew all together and I said, now here's the first half pint. When you bring in 10 boxes, you get another half pint. He said, they fill this damn packing house up in one day. Now, if you knew Bill Schreiner, that's probably a very true story. But I'm surprised you all didn't mention Austin, because they constantly had some ideas that were over and beyond their norm. One time we had a little packing house down on the south end of town. My brother and I were working in the summertime repairing field boxes on the front porch of all places, but that's where you did that work, you know. And this was about 15th to 20th of August, I guess. All of a sudden we looked up and here came Austin trailers through town, 3 of them or so, loaded with boxes, going south. We both looked at each other and thought, well, what in the world are they going to be picking now? Because grapefruit certainly hadn't matured, and that's what you started with, you know. And in a few days here they came back north loaded with grapefruit. Well, we got in our pickup and went up to see what Austin had been doing. We get up there and they were dumping grapefruit on the conveyor, and sprouts were coming out through the grapefruit where they were dunking. And they had 2 men there with gloves on, wiping the sprouts off just as fast as they were going through there, and they were running like heck, and the inspector was jumping about that high, and Elmer was saying, where does it say I can't do this? And of course, when you eat a grapefruit, the grapefruit seed is sprouted through the grapefruit, it's delicious.
That's just about as sweet as
It
it
is
gets.
just as sweet as it gets. But that was just an example of that operation. I mean, to tell you, they could come up with some ideas.
You might have mentioned that about the sprouts through the grapefruit.
Well, there were some other folks that, I never did have much dealings. What was Margaret Strickland's husband's name?
Martin.
Martin. Now, were they big growers around here?
They're not big,
Not
but
big. They had some nice growth.
And they were very meticulous. They could tell you to the teaspoon how many bags of fertilizer was put on every grove.
Well, Martin could, I don't know the song.
Yeah, but Martin
Yeah,
could tell you
Martin.
he could tell you what size range, how many boxes he produced 10 years earlier on the same block. He was, and George Reedy was not, was it George Reedy? George Reedy was almost that way.
Well, Martin used to say the best thing for a grove is footprints.
Is what?
Footprints.
Professor Max said that too. What about Theodore Strawn?
Strawn was the land guy.
Well, this only because Mike mentioned him, he had some of his boxes in there, so I wasn't sure.
Well, Mr. Strawn was kind of over the top. He planted that grove out there at Seminole Springs and decided it was so cold, but he was going to interplant his citrus trees with pine trees.
They were heaters.
And they were gonna keep the frost off of them, but I think.
It got too cold for
Yeah,
it.
frost wasn't the problem. Frost wasn't the problem when it got to 8 degrees out there.
They were a unique family, but I tell you what, most of them were engineers. And they came up with some of the earliest stuff for improvements in citrus of anybody, like spray machines and stuff.
Yeah, and
But,
that packing house in DeLeon Springs, I guess the one burned down, and they said the next one wasn't, and that one is what, metal and glass?
Yeah, but I understand they had it made up north and shipped in here and put it together.
Yeah, Chicago.
All white fruit company.
Yeah. That's a unique packing house.
But the old men, I don't know what they had against equipment, but they didn't want any tractors in their drove. They worked mules and even hauled their fruit out on wagons and everything. But, they raised some good fruit over there in the land for years.
But one thing, talking about fires, how many packing houses burned down in Umatilla?
Almost all of them.
Yeah.
You know what caused it, don't you? Friction.
Friction? Yeah.
Insurance company rubbing against the mortgage.
I thought it might have been the match against the striking rate.
Are you still? Scratch it.
And it seemed that packing houses always seemed to
John
burn down
said that.
in the summertime, didn't they? After the fruit had been packed and everything else, they,
It was drier then.
yeah.
Well, when you think about it, they were all wood, and you know, they were built, most of them up off the ground, and so even in the wintertime, we'd find hobos and so forth crawling underneath the packing house, stay near some of those heaters in the corner rooms and so forth. It's a wonder they didn't burn more. But my brother and I had packing house that's still standing, and I guess it looks kind of shabby, but it's still holding.
We talk
holding
about
itself.
the, economy, and this is one of the things that, Golden Gym, when they were moving the packing house and their headquarters from Altoona to South Umatilla, there was a crew that went up there, and we salvaged everything we could out of that packing house in Altoona, including the wiring. Because I was on the wiring pull crew with your electrician that was in charge of putting everything back together. And the wires in those long conduits were perfectly good. They were just inside the conduit. So we were breaking apart the conduit and pulling the wires back in and rolling the wire back up. And it got back down to south.
It's called recycling now.
Recycling, and it was all copper wire.
I bet Mr. Floyd had something to do with that.
J.W. Conley was probably the one that was.
It was Conley, yes, it was. Anything that, we took apart machinery on the bottom there, that was the crates, the conveyor belts for the crates. Everything we could, we got taken apart and moved to the new plant, to begin with anyway.
Who was the gentleman that was the general manager for Umatilla CGA, the packing house?
Mr. Hipson.
Mr. Hipson,
Now, is the
C.B.
story,
Hipson.
is the story true that he bought a Model T pickup truck and stored
Absolutely.
it in the packing house?
He had been through World War I when equipment got short before, and he thought that, with the winds of war were blowing on World War II, and so he went down to a dealership and bought brand new straight job, or was it a pickup? Anyway,
Straight
I
job.
think it was a straight job.
46 Ford.
And put it in a building up there near where, I think where Dutch is, back behind, on the boulevard in Umatilla anyway, in a building, locked the door. And I guess they paid taxes on it for, you know, years and years and years. And when Mr. Hipson died, the board of directors started, you know, checking all the buildings out, and went down there and found that thing up on a, with the tires off on top of concrete blocks, brand new.
Well, my memories of him, he used to call everybody chap. Remember that, Dixie? Everybody, you could be
Yeah.
60 years old or you could be 14, you were a chap. And my brother had bought for cash a small block of Satsumas, and Satsumas doesn't even come under inspection rules. And my brother sent me out to gather a test out there on the hill. What's the hill? Thrill Hill. Road. I was in there grabbing a test, and here came Mr. Hipson up behind me. Chap, what are you doing? Now, we'd already signed a contract to buy the fruit, so I mean, really the fruit didn't belong to him then, you know. What are you doing? I said, I'm picking up a test to test these Satsumas. He said, nope, they don't pass. And I said, well, have you run a test on Mr. Hipson? Nope, but they don't pass. He said, I don't want you picking them. And I thought, well, here, you know, he's telling us not to pick them, and we really own them. And he said, here, and he takes a knife and cuts a slice, just cuts it in half. He said, bite into it. And I did, and he said, see there, it doesn't pass. That was his method of testing. He was quite a guy.
He went to Cornell.
Yes, sir.
He was a smart old man, but
He
he
was.
had some funny ways. He didn't have a man that worked for him, and some of them had worked there for years and years and years, that he would trust to go out and get a truck and take it out in the field. The old man would go, check the oil and the water and the gas in them, and crank them up and bring them around, and then they would take them to gas.
Well, we used to haul his eliminations from his packing house to Lake Wales to Florida Natural now. And this is the truth. His eliminations, he had a big bin up and on top of the house to where you can unload it right into the trailer. Most of the time he would run his eliminations in field boxes and put them in the cooler. And we'd back our trailers in there next to the platform and hand dump from the cooler into the trailer to take to the plant. And we used to laugh and say, his eliminations are better than our number ones. Florida Natural really ought to appreciate them.
Just swap them out.
Well, Bill Schreiner did that story, is what I heard. Now, I don't know whether this is true, but supposedly when Florida Foods first opened up, at 57 Freeze, Schreiner wanted some fresh fruit to run. He couldn't find any, and he went out to Florida Foods and climbed up on a truck and found some fruit that looked like it was not frozen and in good condition. So he went back and dug a hole in his unloading slope and rigged up some machinery and ran that bulk fruit through his packing house. And the inspector was saying he couldn't do that, and he said, well, I'm doing it. And I always said that was the first guy that tried to invent picking in bulk in 10-box pallets. It wasn't a 10-box pallet, it was a straight job. But he was running his packing house off of Florida Foods eliminations. Not eliminations, they were fresh fruit coming off the grove.
What about those old field ladders, the big ones?
The
We talked
ladders?
about those, yeah.
Well, I never did see anybody, but we have
Well, I used them, I can tell you about them.
four 38-foot picking ladders. So how did they use a 38-foot picking ladder?
You had to have somebody stand on the end, and you keep walking the rounds to get it up. You got it on the tree, and you just watered it around.
They would swing.
But today you couldn't use those, Brendan, because by the time you met all the OSHA regulations and had a chest pack and a backpack parachute on, you couldn't have room for your fruit pack.
But they had a bag that would carry 50 pounds of fruit up and down that ladder. And they'd be little guys. That always amazed me. Little, small pickers. They'd would just be able to swing that ladder. They'd set it in the ground and they'd swing it almost a quarter of the way around that tree, and then they'd come back and swing it the other way and then move it 3 or 4 times on the whole tree. How did they do that? Mr. Hipson was the last one that I ever saw, a 35-foot ladder, and he had about a dozen of them that he'd loan out once in a while.
Well,
But
when he
boy,
picked
you
that
better
stuff-
bet you better bring them back.
When he picked that stuff out at Lake Alabama, he needed some of those. Cause there was some tall cemetery right out there around where you
He-
lived.
He counted those ladders 2 or 3 times.
Well, Bill Lennon and I picked up 4 of them from R.D. King's barn in Winter Garden, and Bill had to bring a 35-foot gooseneck trailer to load those things in. And I just marveled how these were 38-footers, and I just marveled how anybody could manipulate that thing, go up and down that ladder all day long.
But did they have to be that tall because the trees back then were all seedling trees?
They were
Is that
seedling
why?
trees and
Yeah.
there was no way to cut them back. Cause you didn't have any edging machines or toppers or anything.
There were trees that picked 40 boxes of oranges or almost 100 boxes of grapefruit, one tree.
See what they did, they got those trees so big and lots of times, even with those long ladders, you couldn't get to the top of them, so you'd still leave a lot of fruit in the top. Unless you climbed up there and got it.
When did they start cutting trees back? After the '62 freeze?
Well, I think there was a little bit done before then, but the freeze is what really started cutting them back.
Well, up until 57 freeze and 62 freeze, you didn't see people picking and throwing the fruit on the ground either. They brought them down in the back. And it was only when family groups started harvesting fruit in the freeze years where the kids could pick the fruit up off the ground and the parents could pick them and throw them on the ground. But that was unheard, that was a sin in many growers' grows to throw fruit on the ground because it would hit thorns and limbs and get bruised and so forth. Now it's the way to harvest, I guess.
When I was a boy, everything was clipped, even grapefruit.
Really?
You didn't pull anything.
So even grapefruit?
They had some snub-nosed clippers that you used on
Yeah.
grapefruit.
Boy,
But on tangerines and all, they were all clipped.
and when they packed them, they made sure that the blossom end was up on those tangerines in that box. Boy, I mean, it had to shine.
And on top of that, before, they'd take oranges and grapefruit and they were wrapped in paper. Every piece that was packed.
Not just the top row, but everything.
No, everything.
But see, there again, Dixie, a lot of that started with the gift fruit shippers requiring it, or doing it to help act as a preservative. I mean, it helped isolate the fruit. If one orange got rotten, it didn't penetrate through the whole box. Oh, they were doing that right on up into the 60s.
All right, anybody have anything else, any characters that we haven't talked about?
Probably quite a few we haven't talked about.
I didn't know Ed Zellman very well. Was he a quiet guy, a loner?
Real quiet. But he was one of the nicest fellows that you ever knew, and one of the hardest workers that you ever saw.
Now, who started the citrus industry up in this area?
Who started it?
Pioneers.
I mean, like, who are some of the pioneer families then?
Well, it's the one that I've always been told was Ocklawaha Nurseries, Connor family. They were one of the largest shippers of fresh fruit. I was always told that they moved from Ocklawaha from Ocklawaha to Lake Jim after the 1894 freeze.
Well, there were some people that were here. I like Lawrence Atkinson's story in the fact that his family left Georgia and was heading south for better times, and somebody said, well, Lawrence, why'd y'all stay in Umatilla? And he said, well, we got this far and had a flat tire and figured we might as well just stay. So,
He said the boll weevil ran him out of Georgia.
Yeah, that's what he used to say.
and Lawrence was another quiet gentleman that was was an institution here for many, many years. And I don't think you'd find a nicer gentleman anywhere than Lawrence was. He was a great guy.
You talking about Mr. Connor? Did you know him pretty well?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, he always raised all of his nursery trees with a mule. He wouldn't
Mhm.
put a tractor in there or anything else. He always plow them out with a mule. And he would dig a tree till it got almost the size of a hoe handle. I'd send a 1.5-ton truck over and he'd put 240 trees on them. And he didn't dig little trees. And then later on, when we got to, you know, setting those little 1/2-inch potted trees and stuff, I don't know what he did then, but he went out of business.
Well,
Daddy grew all of our nursery stock was the size of a broom handle. They were 1-inch trees.
well, supposedly Connor was in Ocklawaha when the 94 freeze came. He took his mules and his turning plows and plowed the nursery stock over and covered the roots with dirt, and then picked them all up and moved to Lake Jim.
Well, back then, the growers wanted a big tree. Old man Ed Kaharski down in Groveland there, Bay Lake, I really thought a lot of that old man. I bought a lot of trees when he raised some fine trees. And he sent me one time, or a load that was pretty small. And I went down and I told him, I said, you know, I'm gonna get a lot of flack out of that, because the grower that we planted them in, he ain't gonna be happy at all. He reached over and patted me on the shoulder, he said, son, let me tell you one thing. He said they were all small one time.
I remember one time I was purchasing agent, and I got a bid on 10 120 tires for all of our trailers for that year. And I was so proud. I went down there, sat across from him and said, guess what? I just got a bid on this. I saved this company $25,000. He took his glasses off and said, why haven't you been doing this before?
Put a mark on the back of it. Just put a G on it.
But I want to do it in a pencil, not a pen.
But it won't go through.
Okay.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of interesting people that came across, and there still are. We have the old timers, and I enjoy seeing them. And I got a big kick out of at the last one, where Bill Alberson was there, and I don't know if you noticed, but I was really impressed the way that Mike ushered him around the whole deal. He was so easy and gentle. You know, sometimes you get frustrated with the old man. We got to go over here, Dad. But he helped Bill around, and Bill seems to be doing pretty good. And there were a lot of folks, and like I said, Bob Klingbill was my mentor. He was just one remarkable guy.
He taught me how to fly fish.
One remarkable guy.
Well, the reason he and Mr. Nielsen were such big buddies is they were both from Michigan. They had a lot of things to talk about.
Oh, they did. They did.
Can I get this many?
Yeah.
That was one of the best days I had. I can going out there. They just went on and on and on. We just had a good old time.
Well, I just always loved to raise pretty oranges. And I was one of the first ones in Central Florida that ever put timothy on a grove. I worked with people at chemical company, and we had a real good relationship, and they worked hard with me, and I had about 40 acres of good tenant growth before anybody else knew what was going on. And I really enjoyed that, and that's the reason I got some pretty pictures.
How about you, Glenn?
Well, you know, I can just say we had a small little packing house, but we did a lot of things that most people didn't realize. We were the last people to use a 1 3/5 box. We bought all the Knowles and Company had. They had a whole second floor level of 1 3/5 boxes, and we were also the first to use a 2/5 box. In other words, a 4/5 was the standard, and I took an order for 4 trailer loads of 2/5 boxes that were custom made. but we made the mistake and we cut them in half, and therefore they were literally a 4/5 box just cut in half. Well, you couldn't get your pack right. You could regulate your sizers all you wanted to, and you just couldn't get it looking decent and so forth, but you spent a lot of time. All those boxes fell through the conveyors. I mean, they wouldn't fit on the pallets. Nothing. My brother said, "Don't you ever take another order." First of all, they were custom made. They were only ones. Now, that's a common box. You see it in the industry now, in the gift fruit business. Like Farm Bureau continued programs at 250, but they have now regulated the size to where they fit a normal pack. I always thought that was kind of unusual, that we were struggling hard to get those 4 loads out. But back then, man, if you had an order, you wanted to fill it. You know, you didn't think about what the consequences were. But I learned.
What was the name of your packing house?
Umatilla Packers.
Umatilla.
It was a little tin packing house down by Golden Gym on the north side of Golden Gym. But we ran a lot of bulk fruit. Mm-hmm. We had an extended loader that would go out into a 40-foot trailer. Back then, there were 36-foot trailer, the full length, and we could, little teapot operation, we could dump and load a whole solid load in an hour and a half to 2 hours, and that was unheard of for a little teapot operation, you know. Hand dump, not mechanical dumps.
What is a teapot operation? I'm
Well,
assuming
I
it's
just
small,
meant
but I've
small.
never heard that
I meant
term, so.
Compared, can you imagine sitting next to Golden Gym? It's a teapot.
It's kind of swat you away.
Now, is that, you're talking about the Umatilla Country Club, that was your building,
What?
where they used the antique store?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, the funny part about that, we bought that packing house from Jack Allen and Paul Bryan after the '62 freeze, and we were foolish because we didn't have any money, and why were we buying a packing house when everybody else was shutting them down, you know? And Jack Allen said, "I don't need a packing house." Paul said, "I damn sure don't need 2." And so we were able to get a pretty good deal on that packing house. But it was built by the Kimball family here in Umatilla, and they had operated it with Emmett Hill for a year or 2. But it was like new. It had never been run much at all. But the funny part that I thought was hilarious, when we bought it, we went inside the office, there was still paper in the typewriter. There were still leaves underneath the dump. I mean, when that freeze came in '62, they locked the door and walked away. And what was there, we got, whatever it was, good or bad. Jack Allen was a great guy, and so was Paul. These were small, independent growers, but they were part of the community, a real important part. And by the way, that's the way Lake County existed. I mean, in the city of Eustis, our swimming pool, our city pool, was built by about 5 or 6, 7 citrus growers. Met one morning at Bay Pharmacy and said, "We need a pool." And I'm talking about names like Eichelberger and Hufstahler, and so many of them just, they gave back to the community. And you know, it's hard to see people do that today. They might give their time a little bit, but you don't see people flopping money on the table like you did back in those days. Yeah.
That's the way our Umatilla pool got built, the same way.
Sure.
With donations from people.
And see, you don't realize what they contributed. Like John said, I served on the first fire study committee in Lake County. Claude Smoke and I were on there, and they were trying to raise agricultural rates for fire. And Smoke said, "When was the last time a tree caught on fire? Or when were you called out to put out a fire on a farm or in an orange grove?" And yet they wanted to tax us heavy. But it was interesting that they give their heart out, but they didn't want you dominating them and telling them to pay. Well, anyway, so much for that story. They gave, so many people in churches in this community were built by these people. Yeah, and it's really.
Well, that's one thing about, you know, this, we were talking about C.B. Hipson. My dad told me about C.B. Hipson was the silent fixer at the Presbyterian Church in Umatilla.
I believe that.
if there was something wrong, if there was a leaky roof or something going wrong with the furnace, it would just be fixed. Nobody would know who fixed it. Daddy told me it was C.B. Hempson fixed all that stuff. And he just went in and did it. Never told anybody, never asked permission. Just did it. Didn't have a committee.
Sounds like the Winter Park project.
Well, I was in graduate school, and a good friend of mine, Buddy Johnson, who is on the East Coast, was there with me, and he came back. One of his projects was he was to interview caretakers around the state for Dr. Ziegler. He came back and he said, "I met the strangest guy today." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well," he said, "this guy's from some little town, Umatilla." And I was from Orlando. I didn't know much about it. He said, "I talked to the guy and I talked to the bookkeeper, and I don't understand how he's in business." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the bookkeeper told me that that he has over $100,000 in outstanding Grove Care bills that he's making no effort to collect." And Mr. McCowan told Buddy that Lawrence had a number of these widow ladies in town, and he looked after their grove. He never sent them a bill, and sold their crop of fruit and gave a little bit of money, but that was all they had in addition to Social Security. But Lawrence he had a whole bunch of women that he was looking after in town. And I'm sure that only Mr. McCowan knew what was really going on and what was happening there. So, and I'm sure there are just other stories like that. Bob Eichelberger was the treasurer of the Sunday school account at the Presbyterian Church in Eustis, and the same thing, you know. He never gave us a reporting of what was in the account and anything else. He always, "What do you need?" And there was always enough money. Whatever you needed, there was always enough money. I'm sure that the dimes the kids put in at Sunday school never paid for all the costs, but he made sure that, you know, whatever you needed, it was there.
I always thought it was the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was before the days of entitlement. You know, churches and families looked after each other. We didn't count on the government. So now we're starting to get into politics. We probably better shut down or go home or something. Anyway, thanks, gentlemen. This was our first day, our first effort, and you set a high standard. We're going to have a tough time meeting it. And I'm not going to tell you, I won't lie to you and tell you that you were more colorful than Mike Grant, but you were close.
What do you want?
What's your favorite memory of the industry?
Oh, just the whole thing, all 40 years of it. I started as an electrician because we were building a plant when I went to work for him. And I went into buyer, and I worked in the plant office, and then I worked in purchasing, and then I worked assistant general manager, and then general manager, and then president, and out.
And Jack and I started together.
Yep, we started the same year.
You can't figure out whether you were going uphill or downhill, can you?
What was one of the biggest challenges that you faced then, going through all of that? Because you went through every facet of it.
Going through the freezes.
The freezes.
Yeah, because we went from 24,000 acres of orange grove to 2,400 in 2 freezes, almost back to back.
So we didn't work all of them.
That's
I
crazy.
said we didn't work them all.
No, but that's it's just hard to imagine what happened. You know, people that weren't here or weren't involved don't have any concept.
You
of
can't
what took place.
explain it to them at all.
And
How
they
about
don't.
you?
They don't understand what happened. Why? You know, we thought that when Disney came, that was going to be the demise of the citrus industry, but all those people who had groves down there in South Lake County and in West Orange County, they weren't interested in selling out to Disney because they were making money in the citrus business. I think that probably the greatest shock of the freezes was the fact that there were so many second and third generation people that always got a check from the co-op, and that was Christmas or that was this, and And when the freezes came and Dixie told them, yeah, we can put you back in business for $300 we'll clear the land, $1,000 we'll irrigate it, for $1,000 we can plant the tree, and then we'll cost you about $500 a year for a couple of years to produce it, and then after 5 years, we might be able to get to a break-even point after you've invested $5,000 in an acre. Not many of that second and third generation had that money or were gonna do anything about reinvesting in the industry. Nobody thought it was gonna happen, that we would have a front-end loader freeze like that.
Well, John, we did total growth care when I started Golden Gym for just about probably a third of what fertilizer is today.
Yeah.
And I mean everything.
You were asking me, I think growing up on a small family farm, and watching my family with their perseverance through the freezes and so forth, and low prices, and seeing them stick to it, and particularly in my dad's case, and I guess this was part of being a Depression era child, he was frugal. And so he saved money when prices were good, and he didn't spend money. And I think that was almost a reputation around town. Fred, still having the first nickel, but he may have had. But I remember being a freshman at the University of Florida when the big freeze came in the early '60s. And I remember that freeze night, I put a glass of water out on the shelf outside my dormitory. And the next morning it was frozen solid. And so I said, And I remember, you didn't have cell phones, of course, so I didn't call home much, but I called home the next day. And I asked my dad, I said, am I going to be able to stay in school? And he said, don't worry about it. And I don't even think he had to borrow any money. Because he had it in the bank. And that was, I remember asking him when I was in high school, a lot of my friends' fathers were all driving new pickups and had brand new case tractors or whatever it was, And I said, Dad, how come we don't have new tractors, new pickup trucks? And he said, well, we kind of, can make it do and make it work and all that. And he says, one of these days there's going to be something to come along that'll separate the men from the boys. And it happened. So I really, I think the big lesson from a small family farmer point of view, particularly for as a kid growing up in a family like that, was just seeing them stay with it and not giving up, and the perseverance and just holding on. And that was a good lesson, good life lesson.
I'm surprised he didn't tell you that your granddad was still driving that green Jeep.
It's still in the family. That Jeep is still in the family. Matthew's got it down in St. Petersburg, and it may have more miles on it now than it did when he got it.
Well, sometimes we get these great life lessons from kids at times, and talk about this being in the citrus industry and everything else. And I gave a career day talk at Oak Park Middle School, or one of the elementary schools, someplace anyway. And I would always go in and I'd always ask the kids, what's agriculture? And driving a tractor or having animals or something like this. And I asked it one time, and there was a young girl sitting on the front row, dressed like she was going to work in the bank, when she was 6th grade. She raised her hand, I called on her, and she never batted an eye. She said, agriculture is a way of life. And when you kind of think about it, for you folks, citrus is a way of life. It was there, and I think it's a genetic defect that you have. But you just, like Dixie said, he just likes to grow pretty fruit, likes to grow nice trees. And I found that was the way it was. People just, you just found a way to get it done. Whatever it took, you just found a way to get it done. And
well, you didn't find a citrus grower that didn't have a lot of pride when you think about it.
They got it done. Well, we hope that you will appreciate